Revenge films.
The doctor told me that I need a miracle to get pregnant because I have a chronic illness. I've had that illness since before I got pregnant, so my husband already knows about it and he understands. Instead of complaining about it, he looked at the bright side and he told me that we should consider ourselves very lucky if we get pregnant. My husband always thinks about what's best for me, and he's a very kind-hearted man who never blamed me for our child. However, my mother-in-law was the complete opposite. She is very bad-natured, like one of the villains that you see in movies. When she learned that I was not pregnant yet, she treated me like a useless piece of junk. And whenever we met, she kept on asking me when she'd meet her grandchild, and she keeps on telling me to hurry up the process like I can control nature or something. She rambles on and on how she longs to see her grandchild and how she wants to hold the baby in her arms whenever she pays a visit to her house. But since my husband knows the situation, he stops her from annoying me. Of course, I also told my mother-in-law about my chronic illness before my husband and I got married. However, my mother-in-law denies hearing about it, saying, "I don't know." Apparently, her thinking is that everyone who gets married will naturally give birth to children. However, no matter how much we tried, I can't get pregnant, so she kept on calling me names and speaking ill of me. She even started aggressively ranting. What's worse is that my mother-in-law comes to her house almost every day. When my husband leaves for work, she checks that my husband is not at home and then marches inside our house. She calls me names like defective product and inferior merchandise. After she's satisfied disrespecting me, she then marches back to her house. During that time, I felt like I was the one wrong because I couldn't get pregnant. So I did not tell my husband about the daily struggles that I was facing. So the abusive language continued on and I remained silent about it. However, one fateful day, a miracle occurred. I finally got pregnant. Never have I ever thought that I would get pregnant because of my chronic illness. So I didn't notice that my period was late that month. But just like the stories you usually hear of how women find out they're pregnant, I felt a queasy feeling in my stomach out of the blue one morning. Thinking that there's no way this meant that I'm pregnant, I walked to the nearest pharmacy and bought a pregnancy test kit. I then went to a bathroom and it showed a positive mark. The moment my husband arrived from work that day, I told him about the test and he was overjoyed about the great news. We then headed to the hospital immediately. The gynecologist was also very shocked by the miracle. We then had a follow-up observation after that. After making sure that everything is fine, my husband and I reported our pregnancy to my parents and his parents. My parents and my father-in-law were very happy to hear the news, except for my mother-in-law who wanted a grandchild the most. She started speaking ill of me again even though she finally got what she wanted.
"The baby will probably have a pig-like nose if it takes after your features. What a pity to the baby. You are very hairy, Chloe, so I'm sure you will give birth to a child who is not a human. That baby will probably be called a piggy for a nickname."
My mother-in-law started using abusive language toward me. She pressures me a lot to get pregnant, but when I finally got pregnant, she did this. What in the world does this woman want from me? Apparently, my mother-in-law wants a grandchild, but if I'm the one who gives birth to the child, a piglet will be born. She said that there's no way she'll have a grandchild who looks like a pig. Of course, my husband and my father-in-law stopped her from being disrespectful to me, but she never showed any signs of reflecting on her actions. No matter how much my mother-in-law called me names and disrespected me, I didn't really care anymore because I was too happy with my pregnancy. I completely ignored my mother-in-law and I enjoyed my miraculous pregnancy to the fullest. Even the morning sickness that I had that made me feel so unwell, I was able to tolerate it whenever I thought that the baby inside my belly was also doing its best to grow and survive. I did say that I was hopeless with getting pregnant because of my chronic illness, but the moment I got pregnant, I realized how much I was waiting to have a baby one day. Months passed and before I knew it, my belly was the size of a ball. I safely gave birth to a healthy little boy. My husband and my father-in-law melted the moment they saw the bundle of joy in my arms. I stayed at the hospital for about 5 days, and I then went home together with my husband and our newborn baby. For about a month, I took care of our baby boy while I did the chores at home. My heart was filled with joy and happiness when I watched our cute son drink breast milk. While I was relaxing at home and loving watching our son, my mother-in-law, who never showed up since I gave birth, came to our house holding a baby in her arms. I have no idea whose baby that was or where she got it from until she uttered the most shocking words I heard in my life.
"I prepared a baby for you. Take that pig baby of yours to the orphanage or somewhere, and raise this baby instead."
What are you saying? Do you even hear yourself? Whose child is that? Where did you get that baby from? I had so many questions and I asked my mother-in-law, but it seems like she didn't hear me at all because the response she gave me was,
"This is an animal with your blood running through his veins. There's no problem with leaving that baggy babe in the care of the orphanage, right?"
My mother-in-law said this and that while she slowly made her way closer to me. She then placed the baby on the floor right in front of me and she moved even closer to me, telling me to hand my baby to her. I was scared as to what she was about to do to me, to my baby and me. My mother instincts kicked in, and before I knew it, I was throwing the baby toys that my son got as gifts from friends, and I also took off the handle of the baby stroller and hurled it at her. I then trampled down on the horrified look on my mother-in-law's face and hissed, "Let's find out if you will know what it feels like to be treated like a pig, if your nose turns flat like a pig's." I stomped at her face, mainly on her nose. My mother-in-law mumbled something and then grabbed my leg. I then lost my balance and toppled over. While I was trying to get up and writhing in pain, my mother-in-law called my husband to rescue her. My sense of reasoning flew out the window, and before I knew it, I was holding my baby in my arms and the baby that my mother-in-law brought. I ran as fast as I could to my friend's house, which was a 1-minute walk from my house. I then called my husband for emergency, and he told me to wait where I was. I waited for a while, and my husband finally arrived. When I saw my husband, I also saw my brother-in-law and his wife. They were in tears, and they hugged the baby my mother-in-law brought. That's when it dawned on me. Could it be that the baby belongs to... I had no idea who that infant belonged to, but I now know that it was a child of my brother-in-law. When my brother-in-law's baby was born, I saw him behind a glass window. However, now that the baby has grown, I had no idea it was the same baby. After listening to the stories in my friend's house, I learned that my mother-in-law suddenly appeared at my brother-in-law's house that day. She asked for a cup of coffee from the wife and made her go to the kitchen. Then, while she was alone with the baby, she took that opportunity to escape with it and she ran to my house. When my brother-in-law's wife went back to the living room with a cup of coffee, there was no one in the room, so she panicked. With her baby disappearing in her mother-in-law's sight, she immediately called her husband for an emergency. My brother-in-law then contacted my husband, and since I also called my husband for emergency, that's how they found out where my mother-in-law was. After that, my husband, my brother-in-law, and his wife all headed to our house. It was pandemonium when we arrived at our house. The moment my brother-in-law's wife walked in the door, she headed straight to my mother-in-law and stared her down. That was intense. I thought she was going to actually punch her in the face. My husband was furious with what my mother-in-law said to me earlier. It was complete chaos. With all that happening, my mother-in-law growled, "I will never let myself be related to a pig. My oldest son's wife might have a beautiful face, but she's a prostitute and has a bad attitude. These are my grandchildren, so I can do whatever I want to do with them." My mother-in-law went insane. She apparently doesn't want her grandchild to look like me in the future, and my brother-in-law's wife is beautiful, but my mother-in-law doesn't want her to raise her grandchild. So my mother-in-law thought of an idea of letting me raise a better-looking child according to her. By the way, my mother-in-law calls my brother-in-law's wife a prostitute, but she isn't like that at all. She just has experience being a hostess years before. Hearing the story of the shocking thing that my mother-in-law did, my father-in-law was shocked and turned pale. He apologized profusely to my brother-in-law's wife. He then slapped my mother-in-law with all his might to make her come to her senses.
"What have you done? What in the world were you thinking? How could you steal someone's child? You need to be reported to the police. And to think of sending the baby to an orphanage? Seriously? Get out of here! Hey, out of this house this instant! And never call yourself their grandmother! You have no right to call yourself that!
Why do I have to be the one to get out of here? Why am I being treated as a villain here? I was just trying to give the right baby to the right set of parents.
My mother-in-law yelled and tried to explain herself, but my husband and brother-in-law and father-in-law escorted her out of the house and they declared cutting ties with her. Then my father-in-law contacted his attorney friend so that he can start the divorce process. I heard him saying he didn't want to see my mother-in-law's face ever again. Honestly, I don't want to see my mother-in-law's face again too. That's why when I heard my father-in-law say that, I felt relieved. I mean, with what happened this time, my mother-in-law made an enemy of her whole family, and even my father-in-law, her last ray of hope, is already doing the process of the divorce. There's nothing that my mother-in-law can do to save herself anymore. My mother-in-law was raging in front of my father-in-law for a while, but he contacted his mother-in-law's parents. After a few minutes, they arrived in a car and shoved my mother-in-law inside. They then went on their way to who knows where to discipline her. After that, my father-in-law contacted my aunt and uncle and told them the details as to what happened. They were at loss for words when they heard the whole story. After that, my grandparents-in-law cooperated with the divorce, and my mother-in-law was never welcome to their house ever again. Apparently, my mother-in-law is raging at my grandparents-in-law's house, complaining that she is the victim and that it's absurd for her husband to divorce her.
You're a disgrace to the family! Don't you ever talk to your children and grandchildren again! You're the scum of the earth!
Her relatives heaped abusive words upon her. It seems like they won't let her out of the house because she might embarrass their family even more. By the way, my grandparents-in-law's house is located in the middle of nowhere, where you have to ride a car to get to the city. Both my grandparents-in-law have driver's license, but my mother-in-law doesn't have a driver's license, so I'm sure she won't be able to go to the city on her own. Even after hiring an attorney to get a divorce, if they let my mother-in-law do whatever she wants, they were worried that she might get into serious criminal trouble. That is why my grandparents-in-law said that they will never allow her to get out of the house, so that she won't do anything that might put her behind bars. Well, not being able to get out of the house might feel like being caged in a prison, but that's just a result of her actions. That is why I don't feel any pity for her at all. Indeed, I think that karma finally got to her and she got what she deserved.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.